The city was not a city anymore. It was a skeleton of brick and steel, picked clean by fire and high explosives. The air in Stalingrad was a permanent, acrid fog of smoke, dust, and the sweet, cloying smell of death. For Anya, a woman who had once assembled tractors in the Red October factory, the world had shrunk to a few hundred meters of rubble. She was no longer a worker, she was a predator. The blue and white striped Telniashka sweater she wore under her padded jacket was a mark of the naval infantry, a badge of honor she had earned with a dozen confirmed kills. Her Mosin-Nagant rifle was an extension of her will, her only companion in the ruins. Her nest was on the third floor of a shattered apartment block, overlooking a cratered no-man's land that separated the Soviet lines from the German-held factory complex. Through her scope, the world was a narrow, magnified tunnel of gray and brown. Movement was life and death. She saw a German soldier, young and foolish, stand up to light a cigarette. She exhaled slowly, her finger applying steady pressure. The crack of the shot was lost in the city's constant din. The soldier dropped. She felt nothing. It was arithmetic. Them, or us, across the wasteland, in a captured machine shop that served as a company command post, Oberleutnant Erich von Hausen stared at a map that was increasingly meaningless. The ink lines representing unit positions were fiction. The reality was 100 small, vicious battles for a single room, a staircase, a pile of bricks. He was a Prussian, an officer from a family with a centuries-old military tradition, and this was butchery. It was a fight against rats and ghosts. His men were exhausted, paranoid, and freezing. The order from high command was the same every day: hold. Advance. The pocket was shrinking, and they were being bled white. Another one, Herr Oberleutnant, his sergeant muttered, entering the room and pulling his helmet off. Schmidt. Sniper. Clean shot through the head. Eric didn't look up. Where? The same sector. The Krasny Oktyabr approach. It's the same shooter. The one they call the witch. A sniper. A single, invisible enemy was costing him a man a day, grinding down morale more effectively than an artillery barrage. He had to do something. It was no longer about tactics, it was a personal duel. He was the hunter, and this, which, was the prey that was haunting his command. That he picked up his own rifle, a scoped Mauser Kar 98K that had once been used for hunting stags on his family's estate. He slung it over his shoulder. "I'm going to the forward observation post," he told the sergeant. "No one is to follow me." Anya, shifting her position to avoid being predictable, saw a new figure through her scope. An officer. He moved differently than the others, with a cautious, fluid grace. He didn't run, he flowed from cover to cover. He was hunting too. She settled the crosshairs on his chest, but he disappeared behind a collapsed wall before she could fire. A new variable. A dangerous one. The game had just changed. For 2 days, it was a deadly waltz. Anya would change positions, firing at a target of opportunity, and within minutes, a single, precise shot would ring out, chipping the brickwork inches from her head. The German officer was good. He was patient. He wasn't trying to spray her position with a machine gun, he was studying her, learning her rhythm. He was trying to get inside her head. She found a new nest, a shell of a library, the books scattered and burned, the pages fluttering in the icy wind like dead leaves. It gave her a commanding view but had only one viable escape route. It was a risk. She saw a German machine gun team setting up in a window across the way. It was a clear shot. She took it. The gunner slumped over his weapon. As the sound of her shot faded, she immediately shifted, crawling backward. Crack, the shot was different. Sharper, with a higher pitch than the standard German infantry rifle. It wasn't aimed where she had been, it was aimed where she was going. The bullet tore through the pack she had left propped up as a decoy. He had anticipated her. Her heart hammered against her ribs. He was closer than she thought. Too close, she moved silently, like a ghost, through the hollowed-out building, her boots making no sound on the dust and debris. She could hear him now, the faint crunch of broken glass under a cautious boot. He was in the building with her. The hunt had become a close-quarters duel in a labyrinth of ruins. They saw each other at the same time, in a long corridor that was open to the sky. He was at one end, she at the other. He was younger than she expected, with a sharp, intelligent face and tired eyes. For a fraction of a second, they simply stared, two human beings recognizing the other as the phantom that had haunted their days. Then, they both moved, there was no time to aim. Anya fired from the hip, the bullet going wide. Eric dove through a doorway. They were stalking each other through rooms that had once been people's homes, past the remnants of ordinary lives, a shattered child's doll, a rusting samovar. In a crumbling kitchen, they almost collided. Anya swung her rifle like a club. Eric blocked it with his own, the metal clashing violently. He was stronger, wrenching her weapon away. She fell back, pulling a sharpened entrenching tool from her belt. They stood panting, staring at each other over this primitive weapon. He had his pistol in its holster, but he didn't draw it. He just looked at her, this witch, who was just a young woman, her face smudged with dirt, her eyes burning with a feral will to live. A sound broke the standoff, the low rumble of a Soviet T-34 tank, very close. Its main gun fired, and the wall next to them exploded inwards. The concussion threw them both to the ground, burying them in a shower of plaster and brick dust. The world went black. Anya woke up coughing, her mouth full of dust. A heavy timber pinned her legs. The world was dark, silent except for the ringing in her ears. She was trapped. Panic surged, cold and sharp. Then she heard a groan a few feet away. The German officer was stirring, half buried in rubble himself. He saw her predicament. For a long moment, he just looked at her. He could leave her. He could finish her. It would be the end of the witch. The logical, military thing to do. Instead, he pushed himself up, wincing from a cut on his forehead, and began digging. He didn't speak. He just worked, heaving the splintered beam off her legs with a grunt of effort. She was free. She scrambled back, grabbing a piece of rebar as a weapon, watching him warily. He made no move towards her. He just sat back, exhausted, his energy spent. "Water?" he asked in broken Russian, holding out his canteen. She stared at it, then at him. Slowly, she nodded. He tossed it to her. The water was the most precious thing she had ever tasted. She tossed it back. They were in a pocket of space, a cellar that had been exposed by the shelling. The war was a distant thunder above them. They were prisoners together. Hours passed. They didn't speak, there were no words that could bridge the chasm between them. But a strange, silent understanding passed between them. They were both soldiers. They were both tired. They were both human beings trapped in a machine of destruction. When night fell, the sounds of battle moved away. Eric pointed upwards, then at her, and made a walking motion with his fingers. "You can go." He was giving her a chance. Anya looked at him, this enemy who had saved her life. She pointed to his bleeding head, then at the way he had come. "You should go back." That he shook his head. He would wait. He would not be seen helping the enemy. She climbed out of the rubble, back into the freezing Stalingrad night. She didn't look back. She melted into the ruins, returning to her own lines, her mission a failure, her worldview shattered. A week later, during a Soviet push, Anya's unit overran the German machine shop. It was empty, abandoned. But on the table, next to the useless map, she found it. A single 7.92 by 57 mm Mauser cartridge, standing upright. A message. A farewell. She picked it up and put it in her pocket. The war would rage for months more. She would keep fighting. But she would never again think of the enemy as just a target. They had faces. They had names. They had moments of inexplicable mercy in the midst of the hell they had all created. The factory and the field had produced not just machines and soldiers, but an impossible, silent bond between two people who were supposed to be enemies. The Panther of Prokhorovka. The earth itself was trembling. Inside the Panzerkampfwagen V Panther, the world was a cacophony of roaring engine, grinding steel tracks, and the frantic voices of the crew. They were callsign Falcon, a single, sleek predator thrust into the heart of the largest tank battle in history. Through his commander's periscope, Unteroffizier Klaus Ritter watched the Russian steppe around Kursk unfold into a vision of hell. The summer sky was blackened by smoke from burning wheat fields, and the horizon swarmed with endless T-34s, looking like a moving forest of iron. Gunner. T-34, 11 o'clock. 800 meters. Klaus barked, his voice tight. Identified, replied the gunner, Franz, his eye pressed to the high-powered Zeiss scope. Armor-piercing. Fire. The Panther rocked violently as the long 75 mm KWK-42 cannon roared. A heartbeat later, the distant T-34 erupted in a spectacular fireball, its turret spinning lazily into the air. A cheer went up inside the cramped, oily interior. Target destroyed, yelled the loader, Hans, already slamming another massive shell into the breach. They had been told the new Panther could destroy any Soviet tank from a safe distance. They had not been told they would be so badly outnumbered. The Soviet tanks came on in waves, a seemingly inexhaustible tide of green-brown metal. They were faster, more maneuverable, and they were everywhere. Falk and the rest of their battalion were inflicting horrific losses, but they were being slowly surrounded, their flanks crumbling under the sheer weight of the Soviet assault. Driver, reverse. Hard left. Klaus shouted. They're trying to get around our flank. The driver, Willie, threw the Panther into a grinding reverse turn. But as they pivoted, a thunderous impact struck their left side. The sound was like a cathedral bell being struck by a giant's hammer. The compartment filled with the smell of ozone and hot metal. The engine whined, and they lurched to a stop. Report. Schmidty, report. Klaus yelled to the radio operator. Hit on the left drive sprocket. Track is damaged. We're immobilized, came the panicked reply. Through his periscope, Klaus saw the situation was dire. Two more T-34s were bearing down on them, their 76 mm guns seeking the kill. Their own battalion was retreating, leaving them behind. They were a wounded falcon, trapped in a field of wolves. The Battle of Prokhorovka was leaving them behind. The first T-34 fired. Its shell screamed past the Panther's turret, missing by inches. Inside Falk, the crew was bathed in a cold sweat. They were sitting ducks. Gunner. Prioritize the one on the left. Driver, can you give us any traverse? Negative. The track is jammed solid. Willie yelled back, frantically working the controls. "Franz, you have to make the shot count," Klaus ordered, his heart pounding. The Panther's turret whined as it traversed. Franz, his face a mask of concentration, settled the crosshairs. Firing. The shot was true. The lead T-34 shuddered and stopped, smoke pouring from its engine deck. But the second T-34 was now terrifyingly close, under 200 meters. It fired. The shell hit their sloped frontal armor with a deafening clang and ricocheted into the sky, leaving a deep, angry scar. They had been saved by their superior design, but their luck was finite. His next shot might find a weak spot. "Hans, load he. Aim for his tracks. We need to cripple him," Klaus commanded, changing tactics. The high-explosive shell was loaded in a flash. Franz fired. The explosion directly in front of the T-34 threw up a curtain of dirt and smoke. When it cleared, the Soviet tank was unharmed, but its commander had become disoriented. It began to turn, presenting its thinner side armor. "AP. Now!" Klaus screamed. Hans worked with frantic speed, swapping the shell. The breech clanged shut. Franz fired again. The armor-piercing round tore into the T-34's side, and it brewed up instantly, flames licking out of every hatch. A temporary silence fell, broken only by the crackle of the burning tanks and the distant rumble of the main battle. They were alive, but still trapped. The radio was a constant stream of desperate German traffic, units reporting heavy losses, requesting support, falling back. "Unteroffizier," Schmidt said, his voice grim. "Battalion command is ordering a full retreat. They are writing us off. We are to destroy the vehicle and try to make it back on foot." Klaus looked at his crew. They were young, terrified, and looking to him. To abandon the Panther was to die on the open steppe, hunted by Russian infantry. Their only chance was the machine. "No," Klaus said, his voice low and determined. "We are not abandoning Falk. Willie, Schmidt, grab the tools. We are going outside to fix the track." It was an insane risk. But staying inside their metal coffin was a guaranteed death sentence. The crew looked at him, and saw not desperation, but resolve. They nodded. They would fight for their tank, and their tank would fight for them. Popping the hatch was like stepping into another world. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning fuel and flesh. The sounds of battle were closer, more personal. Klaus and Franz provided cover from the hatches with their MP-40s while Willie and Schmidt, shielded by the Panther's massive hull, went to work with wrenches and a sledgehammer. The damaged track was a mangled mess, jammed around the drive sprocket. Every second felt like an hour. Infantry. Russian infantry. Franz yelled, firing a burst from his submachine gun. A group of Soviet soldiers had emerged from a nearby trench line, seeing the vulnerable crew. Bullets sparked off the Panther's armor. Klaus joined Franz, spraying fire, forcing the infantry to take cover. Willie and Schmidt worked faster, their hands bleeding, driven by pure adrenaline. "Come on, you beast, move." Willie grunted, landing another heavy blow with the sledgehammer. With a final, metallic shriek, the track loosened. "It's free. Get in. Get in." Schmidt screamed. They scrambled back inside, slamming the hatches shut just as a grenade exploded harmlessly against the side skirts. The engine, which had been kept running, roared back to life. "Willie. Slow reverse. Let's see if she holds." Klaus ordered. The Panther shuddered, and then, miraculously, it began to move backward. The track held. A wave of relief washed over the crew. They were mobile again, but their ordeal wasn't over. They were deep behind the shifting Soviet lines. Klaus navigated not by the sun, but by the sound of the heaviest German artillery fire, a beacon in the chaos. They moved like a wounded animal, avoiding direct confrontations, using the smoke and terrain for cover. They encountered a lone Soviet Su-76 self-propelled gun, and Franz destroyed it with a single, well-aimed shot before it could react. Hours later, as dusk began to settle over the scarred battlefield, they saw it, the outlines of German half-tracks and the familiar silhouettes of other Panthers, forming a new defensive line. They had made it that AS Falk rumbled into the relative safety of the German rear. The crew was silent. They were exhausted, caked in grime and sweat, their ears ringing. They had lost the Battle of Prokhorovka. The great German offensive had failed. But as Klaus looked at his crew, alive, united, and unbroken, he knew they had won something else. They had trusted their machine and each other against impossible odds, and that trust had carried them through the fire. The Panther of Prokhorovka was wounded, but it was still a falcon, and it had flown home. The icebreaker. The Finnish taiga in winter was a world of absolute white and profound silence, broken only by the whisper of skis and the groan of frozen trees. Corporal Lauri Kivi moved through this landscape as if he were part of it, his white camouflage smock making him a ghost among the birches. He was a Sisai, a Finnish guerrilla fighter, a master of the art of winter war. As he patrolled the frozen no-man's land between Finnish and Soviet lines, his breath plumed in the -30-degree air, each exhale a small defiance of the cold that sought to claim everything. The Finns were fighting alongside the Germans now in what they called the Continuation War, a chance to take back the land stolen from them in the Winter War. But for Lauri, the alliance felt unnatural. The Germans were loud, arrogant, and treated Finland like a vassal state. His war was not for some grand Nazi ideology, it was for his family's farm, for the forests of his childhood, for Finland. He fought with a sniper's patience and a hunter's intimacy with the land, traits his German comrades neither understood nor respected. A sound cracked the silence, not the sharp report of a rifle, but the deeper, more brutal thud of a mortar shell. It was followed by a short, frantic burst of machine gun fire, then nothing. It was close, maybe half a kilometer east, in a sector that was supposed to be empty. Lauri dropped to one knee, his Seiko M/39 rifle held ready, his senses screaming. A patrol. A lost unit. He moved forward with practiced stealth, his skis gliding silently over the deep snow. He found the source of the noise quickly. A Soviet reconnaissance patrol had stumbled upon a small German outpost. The fight had been short and brutal. 2 German soldiers lay dead in the snow, the crimson around them a shocking stain on the white canvas. A third German was moaning, propped against a tree, clutching his stomach. And a few yards away, a Soviet soldier lay motionless, his felt Valenki boots and thick coat dark against the snow. The wounded German saw Lauri and raised a trembling hand. Hilf! Hilf! He pleaded. Lauri ignored him, his eyes fixed on the Soviet soldier. He approached cautiously, his rifle trained on the man. As he got closer, he saw the soldier was young, barely more than a boy, with a pale, frightened face. He was alive, but a dark patch of blood was spreading on the snow beneath his leg. He had been hit in the thigh. His rifle lay out of reach. When he saw Lauri, his eyes widened in terror, and he began to babble in Russian, words Lauri didn't understand but whose meaning was clear. "Don't kill me," the wounded German cried out again, his voice weaker. "Finn, help me." Lauri stood between them, his breath fogging in the frozen air. The German, his ally. The Russian, his enemy. The silence of the forest pressed in on him, heavy and judgmental. He had a choice to make, and in this frozen wasteland, mercy was a currency that could get you killed. Lorry made his decision with the cold pragmatism of a man who knew this land would kill the weak without a second thought. He walked over to the wounded German. The man looked up at him with desperate hope. Lorry knelt, not to administer aid, but to quickly search the man's pockets and pack. He took a field dressing, a chunk of black bread, and the man's canteen. The German's eyes clouded with confusion, then betrayal, as Lorry stood up and walked away from him, back towards the Soviet soldier that he approached the young Russian slowly, keeping his rifle slung but his hands visible. He dropped the German canteen and the bread next to the boy. The Russian stared, uncomprehending, his body shaking from cold and shock. Lorry then pointed to the bloody leg, then to the field dressing in his own hand. Understanding dawned in the boy's eyes, mixed with deep suspicion. This was the enemy. Why would he help? But the pain and the cold were greater than his fear. He gave a slight, hesitant nod. Lorry worked quickly and efficiently. The air was so cold the metal of his belt buckle threatened to freeze to his skin. He cut away the torn trouser leg, applied the sulfa powder from the German dressing, and wrapped the wound tightly to staunch the bleeding. The whole time, the Russian boy watched him, his breathing shallow. When Lorry was done, he pointed to the canteen. The boy grabbed it and drank greedily. From across the clearing, the German soldier let out a final, wet gurgle and then was silent. Lorry didn't turn around. He had made his choice. He had chosen the one who might have a chance to live. The German was gut-shot. He was already a dead man in this frozen hell. The Russian had a fighting chance, but now he had a problem. He couldn't leave the boy here. He would freeze to death by nightfall. And he couldn't take him back to the finish lines as a prisoner. The boy would be interrogated and shipped off to a camp, a fate Lorry found he had no stomach for. He had broken the ice of enmity by helping him. To capture him now would be to let it refreeze. That he made another decision. He fashioned a crude drag sled from a pair of skis and a ground sheet. He gestured for the boy to get on. The Russian, his eyes filled with a confusion that mirrored Lorry's own inner conflict, complied. Lorry would take him east, towards the Soviet lines, and leave him close enough to be found. It was treason. It was madness. But in the absolute whiteness of the forest, the stark lines of allegiance had blurred into shades of gray. He was no longer just a Finnish soldier, he was a man, responsible for the life of another man he had chosen to save. Pulling the sled through the deep snow was backbreaking work. The Russian boy was light, but the effort of breaking trail while hauling a load made Lorry's muscles burn and his sweat freeze against his skin the moment he stopped. They did not speak, they shared no common language. Their communication was reduced to gestures, a pointed finger to indicate direction, a shared canteen of water, a piece of hardtack broken in two. As dusk began to stain the white sky a deep blue, Lorry knew they were close. He could smell the distinct odor of a Soviet encampment, tobacco, diesel fuel, and unwashed humanity, on the shifting wind. He stopped behind a dense thicket of pines. This was far enough. He helped the boy off the sled. The Russian stood unsteadily on his good leg, leaning against a tree. He looked at Lorry, and in that look was a universe of unasked questions and ungiven thanks. He suddenly fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. He held it out to Lorry. It showed a woman with a kind face and two small children. His family. Lorry looked at the photo, then back at the boy's face. He nodded slowly. He understood. This was not a soldier, this was a son, a father, a man ripped from his life and thrown into a war he probably didn't understand any more than Lorry did. Lorry pointed through the trees, in the direction of the Soviet smells and sounds. He then pointed at the boy, and made a walking motion. "Go. Your people are there," the boy nodded, his eyes glistening. He hesitated for a moment, then shoved the photograph back into his pocket. He turned and began to hobble away, using a branch as a crutch. He didn't look back. Laurie watched him until he disappeared into the twilight shadows of the forest. He was alone again. The silence returned, but it felt different now. It was no longer empty, but full of the echo of the choice he had made. He had betrayed his German allies and aided his Soviet enemy. He had followed a code that existed nowhere in any military manual, a code written in the stark, simple language of survival and humanity that he turned his skis west, towards his own lines. The war would continue. He would still fight for Finland. But as he glided through the silent, frozen trees, Laurie Kivi knew he had crossed a line from which there was no return. He had broken the ice of pure hatred, and in the freezing water beneath, he had found a reflection of his own humanity. It was a dangerous discovery, one that could get him killed, but it was also the one thing the cold and the war had not been able to take from him.